Hi, I'm Hanse Herzog. Welcome to Co-Create, the Global Co-Creation Challenge. With me today we have Rob Hopkins, the initiator of the Transition Town movement, and we speak about visioning a good life. Thanks, Rob, very much for joining us in today's call. We already had a little chat, so we hope the internet connection is working well. We have a little bit of lag, but I think we will work it out. Thank you for joining in this call. As we stream to Facebook Live, you have the possibility to use the comment section to ask us questions and share your thoughts. We are happy to pick them up. And yeah, so anything else to say? I think you know Co-Create already a little bit through the past. So our vision is to unite the world community so we are able to co-create a good life for all. And to sensing this good life, what it really means, we're doing the expert interviews during this month, focusing on the topic of the and yeah, I'm eager to hear about Rob's story. And Rob, may you just introduce yourself and the background with Transition Town movement?
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's lovely to be here. I hope my internet is going to be okay. I am in lockdown in the UK in a house with 5 young people under 26 who spend a lot of time online. So I'm a bit in competition with them. So yeah, hello, I'm Rob Hopkins. I live in the southwest of England in a town called Totnes. I am one of the founders of the Transition movement, which is now active in about 50 countries around the world, which we'll come on to talk about, I'm sure. I am also a writer. I've written a few books, and the most recent book was about imagination. And one of the things that I like to do in my spare time is printmaking. I do prints, lino cut printmaking. I have a garden, and that's it really. Oh, and I do a podcast series called From What If to What Next, where every episode we take a different big what if question, and rather than just discuss the technicalities of a particular policy, we say, what would it be like to live in a world where that had actually happened? What would it smell like and feel like and be like to experience? So that's called From What If to What Next, and that's something I'm quite involved with at the moment.
Cool, awesome to hear, because as we see here, you're already very much into the topic of sensing, about visioning, about creating a feeling for what a good life is. Because I think many people we speak about, we are discussing about, we're developing projects. What is very important is to connect from the heart level to a vision of a better life, a future we would like to live in. And yeah, thank you for introducing yourself. Maybe you would like to share a little bit about Transition Town movement. What's the background? What is it for those who don't know it? And how is it related to a good life?
So the transition movement is something which started here in the town where I live in 2005, and it was based on the idea of what a bottom-up, grassroots, positive, optimistic, imaginative, hopeful response to climate change would look like. So, you know, there are things that governments have to do, there are things that we can do as individuals, there are things that businesses have to do, but what about that bit in the middle which we could do as communities? What could we do together with the people on our street, the people in our neighborhood, the people in our apartments? And that's really the bit that the transition movement explores. If we could bring a sense of possibility and imagination at the local scale, and we could see this as an enormous opportunity for coming closer together, for creating new businesses, new organizations, for really reimagining the place where we live, what would that look like? So it started here in my town and has now spread to many, many other places. And communities do projects around food, or they create new community energy projects, or local currencies, or a different way of looking at how a community might work together. And we always say when groups want to become a transition group that it's free to join. There's no membership. All the resources are completely free. But we say there is just one condition, which is that you share your stories. So in many ways, the transition movement is a network of people around the world sharing their stories of change and possibility, and really sharing, you know, the power of what we can do at a local scale rather than just sitting and waiting for permission.
Wonderful. Yeah, I remember very much how I came across the Transition Town movement. It was my time coming to the bigger city of Graz in Austria and getting to know these grassroots movements, these community gardens, and I got introduced. And Transition Town really brought me into this wide field of different actions we can take, different topics which are around and where we can get active as people, as public persons, and the joy about creating our surrounding. So this is what I really love about Transition Town approach, that there is so much energy in it, so much power and so much heart on the community level as well. Okay. And we hear it's now over 15 years. Over 15 years ago that it was founded. Sorry, just maybe also give us an idea where is Transition Town standing right now and where it wants to go to.
So yeah, as you say, the first transition group was started in 2005 and launched officially in 2006. And then this was the first one. You know, we were experimenting with something that we hoped might make some kind of a difference here in this town. Mm-hmm. And already when we had our launch event, there were there from 6 or 7 other places in the UK, and it started to spread very, very quickly. So there are now, as I said, 50 countries where there are transition groups. There are 26, I think, countries which have a national, what we call a national hub. So Transition Italy, Transition Austria, you know, so where countries have their own organizations there to support transition in that place. So there are so many transition groups now that it's really hard to keep up with them all and what they're doing and all of their stories. But we hear many amazing projects of community food projects that range from small things like incredible edible initiatives and community gardens, as you mentioned, to increasingly ambitious things like cities who are really rethinking their food system. So in Liège, in Belgium, the transition group there have created a project called Ceinture Alimentaire, where the city is reconnecting with the land around the city. And they have created 25 new cooperatives thank you very much. They've created 25 new cooperatives in Liège. And they've raised 5 million euros of investment from local people to fund those. They've created a farm, 2 vineyards, a brewery, 4 shops now in the center of the city, a distribution business, a local currency. It's just fantastic. And for me, seeing projects like that is always really emotional, because it's like a vision that I've had in my head for a long time, and now it's a real thing actually working on the ground. In some places, communities have created really ambitious community-owned energy companies, and again, they are acting as a vehicle for the community to invest into them rather than into the banks. But many transition groups also do smaller things. They run regular repair cafes. They run projects to to train people how to grow food. They run all kinds of different things, and for me, the diversity of it is one of the most beautiful things about it. And one of the things that I've really learned is that we live in a culture where we only celebrate the really big, really successful projects, well, what we class as being successful, but actually in the transition movement, the small projects matter just as much. The small little garden in a street, the community energy saving project is just as important as something like what we see in Liège, because it's all about stories and showing what's possible and helping people to imagine a different future and then giving them a taste of that future. So I know that one of the things we're going to talk about is visioning and the power of visioning, and it's one of the things the transition movement does beautifully. But I think when you can combine visioning with really tangible, real, practical examples that people can see and meet and touch and smell, then you have something really, really powerful.
Oh yes, and I know Transition Town with this approach since the beginning on. That's important to tell the stories. So I think there are many movies created picking up examples showing what people are doing. You have written different books about the smaller steps, and you were speaking about also the small actions are important. I think that's the basic of grassroots movement, right? That there are so many little seeds and sproutings coming out that together it's a wide field. And I think it's very empowering for people out there to see also the smaller stories, to realize that it doesn't have to be the big social entrepreneurial projects all the time, or it's not only business and government changing, but really each of us can change something. Really like this, and I would like, first of all, I would like to reach out to you as an audience right now. Again, if you joined in later on, welcome to this video, to this stream. We are streaming with Facebook Live, so you have the chance to comment here and share your thoughts and ask questions to Rob. So please get active, use the comments, give us like, and also share out to your friends to bring more people into this stream. And I'm looking forward now, because I hear already some topics, but I want to ask now, Rob, very specifically, what does a good life means for you? So your personal good life, and what does a good life for all mean for you?
For me, I feel like a good life is, well, I think the first thing is that a good life has to emerge and be framed in the context that we are now in a global context. So we are now living in the time of the climate and ecological emergency. So the question should be, what is it to lead a good life in the time of the climate and ecological emergency? Because of course, if there were no climate and ecological emergency and no economic crisis and no context of systemic racism and inequality and so on, it would be a lot easier to live a good life, and it would be a lot easier for everybody to live a good life. Whereas at the moment, that ability to live a good life is not evenly distributed. So for me, one of the first things is that if we are to live a good life, we have to live it in a context where everybody else has the same kind of capacity and opportunity to live a good life. It's not just something restricted to the privileged. I feel like one of the things that we really have to cultivate is the ability to see is to be able to cultivate a good life within limits. So I always love to talk about Dr. Seuss's book, Green Eggs and Ham, one of the most famous children's books, which came about because Dr. Seuss was challenged by his publisher to write a book using just 50 words. And it took him 2 years to figure out how to write a book with just 50 words. But he took that limit of just using 50 words and he used it to write this incredible book that people still read their children 60, 70 years later, you know. And I think that ability to live a good life within constraints is going to be one of the great aspects of it. How do we reduce our carbon footprint by 80, 90%, which is what we need to do, and still live a good life? How do we live in a world where we no longer are able to fly around the world to go to a party in Thailand and then go and meet our friend in New York for the weekend and then go to Amsterdam to do some work? You know, how do we live a life where we don't fly and live a good life, a better life, actually? How do we invest money in banks but in our local economies and still live a good life? So for me, when I think about what a good life is in my context, it's really one where the economy around me has changed to be one which is owned much more by people. There's a much stronger sense of local democracy. We take a much more holistic approach to health and to mental health, and to say that mental health and health are about and good housing and economic opportunity and good work conditions and access to open space and access to clean air. So I always try and help people to imagine this. You know, what would it be like? I love Rilke, the poet, once wrote, "The future must enter into you a long time before it happens," which is what I try to do with people, is to help the future to enter into people, help that good life to enter into people now. And so for me, it really is about food, conviviality, connection, time, space, the capacity to live an imaginative life in a far more equal society, and in a way that embraces limits rather than tries to deny them somehow.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. So I think you shared a lot of topics which are surrounding us each and every day, and I think that's something very important, that those are not topics far away from us, but really the topics we meet on an everyday life basis, like the living, housing, the food, how we consume energy, how we create define our mobility, stuff like that. And something for me very important, you mentioned the self-organization part. Always looking on what we can create by ourselves and how can we design it as we wish. So therefore, I really like the cooperative way of making business, because it's made by the community who is consuming it, and it's really much closer to the people. And I think that's something we have to rearrange, to rechange, to bring everything closer, because right now I think we are dividing the input and the output, or the effects and the results, and bringing those closer together so we can really feel what we are doing and what we are shaping within our life will be more important, I think. To have the feeling of empowerment. And I think especially in COVID, we see that what the situation we are right in, many people feel much less empowered than before. And I think after COVID, we have to make a huge change to come back to this feeling of being able to create something again. What is your experience or feeling right now during Corona, and what do you think about the time after?
I think Corona has been awful in so many ways, and but it has also shown us some really interesting things, I think. You know, as somebody who has been involved in campaigning around climate change for a long time, where the idea that a government might sit down, where all of the world's governments, or most of them, might sit down with scientists, and the scientists will present all of the best scientific evidence that they have, and will say this is an emergency and we need to act with imagination and great urgency and purpose, and we need to do that right now. And the government will say, okay, we will make all the resources available that you need, and we will change everything that needs to be changed, and we recognize this is an emergency. You know, until a year ago, that would have been almost unimaginable. You know, the idea that we would do that for climate change just seemed like, you know, if you even imagined that, you were dismissed as some kind of crazy radical person. But actually, with COVID-19, we've seen that that's possible. It's absolutely possible. So why can we do it for COVID, which, you know, is bad, but compared to the climate change is really not that bad? But we can't do it for the climate emergency because somehow climate change is too political or something. And I think we've also seen that that actually things can change really quickly. When the government decides to move obstacles out of the way, they move them. You know, we developed a COVID vaccine from scratch within about 10 months. And normally it takes 5 years at least. So, you know, we know that people can do extraordinary things. And I love to see the stories around the world of the cities who are saying now, we recognize that if people live in poor housing, if people are breathing polluted air, it makes them far more vulnerable to COVID. If people are unhealthy, are really stressed, it increases their vulnerability to COVID. So we are seeing cities who are reimagining themselves, taking away cars, turning streets into places full of trees, making more parks. You know, there are places who are seeing the opportunity of COVID and the change that COVID demands of us. And then there are other people who are just desperate to get back to how things were before, even though how things were before was a complete disaster. So it feels like when there's no disaster like COVID, that governments dismiss the idea that communities organizing and doing things is of any value at all. Actually, during COVID, it has been communities supporting each other has been what has kept millions of people alive in this country. Millions of people in food need have been really kept alive by the efforts of volunteers and communities because the government aren't doing enough. And then when something like this happens, the government will say, oh, isn't this great? Communities are doing really good things. And then when this is finished, they will just go back to ignoring them again. I think this is really the time when we need to recognize that communities do extraordinary things and we need to support them properly. And I was part of a group who wrote an opinion for the European Union's Climate Pact, where we argued that if you want community groups to do things that governments can't do, you need to resource them properly. You need to support transition groups so they can access funding for what they do, rather than imagining that change on the scale that we need is just going to happen with volunteers, because it's not. But if you resource community groups properly, they can do extraordinary things. And for me, that's one of the big learnings. And I think just the last thing I would say is that we've also learned from COVID that the people who really matter in society, the people who are most precious and most valuable, are the people who are paid the worst, who are protected the least, who are offered the least amount of support. And actually, you know, what use have hedge fund managers been during COVID? No use at all. And actually, the people who have kept us alive and so on are the people often who are paid the least. And I think, you know, every step of the through COVID, governments have tried different things, and it seemed to me from the beginning that the thing to do is to bring in a universal basic income. Bring in a universal basic income right now. It saves the sense of precariousness that the poorest people are feeling, but they just keep doing little piecemeal things. If we introduced a universal basic income now, it would be profoundly transformative and would unlock so much. Would really change the way people feel about where we go from here, I think.
Oh, yes, I think as well. So when I started social work and social management, I was very into the topic of the basic income because I really think that it set up increasingly resources on in the space. So it's open us our visioning capacity, because we have this level of safety, and if people feel a little least basic of being safe, they open up to new spaces and to new imaginations. I think there are so many people out there dreaming about the things they would like to do if they would be able to. And especially in days like now, of course, we have more uncertainty, and we need more solutions afterwards, or also now already. Yeah, that would be lovely, of course. We don't know how far we are still away from it. I think it's hard to tackle this topic. The government is quite far away still from it, but we never know. But speaking about what could happen with the universal basic income, and what could happen if we have the gates open for urgent topics, climate change after COVID. Let's have a look on the imagination part and the visioning part. So maybe you would like to share a little bit about your work, your project. I think there is an event going on from March on. And yeah, anything you would like to share about it? How to envision a good life form.
About the work I've been doing on imagination.
Yes.
Yeah, so about 3 years ago, I found that I kept reading things by people I really admire, like Naomi Klein and Bill McKibben and people like this, climate change activists and writers, who kept saying climate change is a failure of the imagination. And something about that term, that expression, really got under my skin. And I was thinking, why would we be having a failure of the imagination in 2020? Why would that be a thing? And so I did a lot of research about it. I spoke to neuroscientists and poets and philosophers and psychologists and all kinds of artists and people. And I came to the conclusion that actually what we have done in 2021 is to create the perfect conditions for our imagination to contract. That we know that the imagination needs space. It needs us to not be feeling anxious and stressed and in trauma. It needs an education system that gives it some value, some kind of status. It needs a political system where people's voices feel valued. I feel like we have created a kind of perfect storm of conditions to make our imagination contract. And that's really dangerous right now, because this is the time when our survival depends on our imagination. We have to imagine a different future before we can build a different future. And if we can't imagine it, we're really, really in trouble. So I wrote a book called From What Is to What If, where I tried to look at, well, why are we experiencing this, and what can we do about it? And I've really come to to feeling like, we recognize as societies that if we don't give people a good enough diet, then we see a rise in preventable illnesses. If we are a society with a really poor education system, society is not going to reach its full potential. But just over here, just sort of where we can't see it, our collective imagination, the public imagination, our collective imagination is shrinking. And that's really dangerous at this time. So what I wanted to do with the book was to say, oh, hang on, that really matters. We need to put that back in the middle of the room and say, we have an education system in the UK that's testing children from the age of 4. We have 4-year-old children in the UK who don't go to school because they are so stressed about the tests they're going to have to experience. We have schools who have no funding anymore for art, English, any creativity at all, we have it's a disaster. And so for me, it's like we as activists, we need to figure out how do we design in imagination to what we do, because if we just talk about a low carbon future, a more sustainable future, a more equal future, just as intellectual ideas, and we just talk about policies and numbers and facts, it's not going to do it. The only way we are going to be successful is if we can create in people a deep, deep longing for a different future. This is what, for me, this is all about longing. How do we cultivate longing? When Neil Armstrong went to the moon, that wasn't his idea. It wasn't JFK's idea in 1960 to go to the moon. We had been going to the moon for decades in songs and stories, and Frank Sinatra went to the moon, sang us to the moon. Tintin went to the moon. By 1960, the longing to go to the moon was so strong that JFK said, let's go to the moon, and we'll do it in 10 years. And they did it in 9 years, and the average age of the team who did it was 26, because the longing was in place. And longing is created by imagination and by storytelling, play. It's not created by facts and figures. So for me, imagination is fundamental to this conversation about how do we create a good life, because you have to be able to really there's a beautiful term that I came across researching the book of somebody who talked about creating memories of the future. How do we create a memory of the future so that we can cultivate that kind of longing for a different future? And that's why I think the imagination matters.
Yeah, I'm already stepping into the mood of dreaming, and when you shared this, I'm thinking about the pulling and pushing effect. Like with this dreaming and this longing, we create an effect of people are dragged, are pulled towards a good life, towards action. We don't have to pull them, we don't have to push them, but they are dragged to it. This is creating a movement. Yeah. And what do you think? What is your main story you're telling right now to create this wanting, this longing? Or what do you think we need? What kind of stories?
So there's an exercise that I do when I do workshops or when I do big events, where I ask people to close their eyes and to imagine that I have brought my time machine with me from England that I built during lockdown with some plans that I found on the internet. And then I'm going to turn it on, and we are going to travel to 2030. And it's not a 2030 that is a utopia. It's a 2030 that is the result of us doing everything that we possibly could do. And that those 10 years between 2021 and 31 were a time of incredible change that in 2021 was unimaginable, but actually it was a time of incredibly fast, rapid, urgent, positive change. And then I invite them just in their imagination to walk around in that world. I don't tell them anything about what it's like. I just ask them to take a walk in their imagination around a day in the life in that world. And then I ask them and we all sit in silence for maybe 2 minutes. And then we come back again and people share what they see. And it's almost always the same. People say there's less cars. The bird song is so much louder. There's a really strong sense of shared purpose. The air smells amazing. So I do a certain amount myself of telling the story of what I see when I do that. But actually, what's much more important, I think, is to hold a safe space where people can do that themselves. And in the podcast that I do that every episode, whatever the what if question is that we are exploring, we always start with my inviting the guests to do that exercise, to travel forward to 2030 and to take a walk around and then to describe it to us. And it's beautiful. And people really talk about details of things they see and things they hear, and what does it taste like, and it's just beautiful. So we cut those together, and I'm working with an animator at the moment who is going to make little animated sequences of some of these of people's reflections. So while the book From What Is to What If opens, the first 6 pages are my storytelling of what that future might be like. Actually, what's most interesting to me is that when you create the good conditions and you hold people to be able to dream in that way, it's often a really powerful experience for people, very emotional experience for people. And it's something where it takes us out of short-term pleasure and into long-term happiness and contentment. I've never done that exercise and someone has said, oh, it's now have a really much bigger IKEA on the edge of town, or hey, look at my 9G phone. Actually people talk about connection and community and food and smells and connection and time and space, and it touches us into like, why are we here, and what is it that what do we love, and what is it that what is it to be human? What is it to live a good life? As you said at the beginning, it's an exercise that really allows us into what it is to live. What would a good life be? And then it creates that memory of the future in us that is really important for that longing.
Very lovely that you make such an exercise. So for you as audience right now, see this as an invitation to try this at home. And I've done a similar thing also at one of I think the very first video you can find it on Facebook or YouTube. So Vision and Good Life, where I made a guided vision journey to create a similar experience, because I think it's very important that people connect to their inner picture of what does a good life means for them. Because we can talk about it very much in general, but it's really up to each of us. And for me, it's very important that these pictures can be different. It's very important for me that these pictures can be different, because somebody might want to have a future with a lot of technology, and I think that will be part of the future. And other people would like to have a future with less technology. And why should not that be possible? For me, speaking about a good life of all what is a very big term. It's always important that there is space for this individuality, that there are many different stories and pictures within this future.
Yeah, no, I agree, absolutely. I find when I do these sort of activities with visioning and inviting people to do visioning on workshops, is like you say, it opens up those questions that for some people it's a very technological future. For some people it's not such a technological future, but it opens up the really important conversations, I think. And it also we live in a time where social media means that people just tend to be in bubbles of people who agree with them. And we tend to imagine that everybody else just disagrees about everything. But when you do that kind of visioning and you step forward a bit, actually you get beyond that and into the things that we really, really care about and that we really long for, I think. Yeah, I think it's a really good way for people to find common ground.
And this idea of a common ground is very important to me, because for co-create, the vision is to unite the world community, to co-create a good life for all. And in this way, we have the individuality in the collectivity. So it's about each of us have to have their own vision of his good life, but it is connected to the world community, to be a part of it, to feel like a part of it, to be able to create this movement into a direction where a good life is possible for each of us. And I would like to ask you, so you're coming from a very locally and neighborhood-based approach of change. What do you think about this vision of a world community, about the connection of a network of networks, to raise the awareness that we are all individual and locally, but also global connected?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are doing a lot of thinking around that at the moment, and there are so many movements for change, and finding better ways for us to work together and to connect together is really, really going to be so important. And in fact, in March, Transition Network, we have a project called Transition Bounce Forward, and we're going to be organizing an event called the What Next Summit, which is going to be happening during the first couple of weeks of March, which is about bringing together as many different movements as we can to look at how we can be more effective and work together, and how we can be more imaginative as well, I think. So I would really invite people to have a look at, if you Google Transition Bounce Forward, you'll find the website for that, and that event will be going live soon. Yeah, it always feels to me like the neoliberal right wing is very good at organizing and overcoming its differences, and the more progressive movements are not quite so good at it. But this needs to be something where, you know, one of the good things about the internet is that it allows us to share stories from all over the world. And so if a project starts that's doing really well in one place, that model, that example can spread really, really quickly around the world, which is really exciting. And yeah, absolutely, we need to be working across movements, and but we should also remember, I think, that actually often people, in order to do that really effectively, I think we also need some kind of support and resourcing. Because if you're a community that's working really hard to, I don't know, to provide food to people on low incomes, there might not be very much capacity left to be part of an international network reimagining the food system. So we need to be careful, I think, about capacity, and be really mindful about burnout, which is also something which is always present in our movements and really, really dangerous, and recognize that if we want to invite people to be part of something that is really effective like that, we need to be able to build more capacity for that in our movements, I think.
Yeah, speaking about burnout and self-care, I think it's even more crucial in a time like now, like during Corona, of course. Do you have advice for change makers out there to keep this balance between keeping a fire energy alive for doing and bringing change, but not going so far that they burn out? And yeah, any advice for those?
Well, I think burnout is a constant danger in the work that we all do. You know, it's like the shadow of burnout is like the shadow of these movements. You know, I've been involved in things like this since I was about 16, 17, and I know so many great people who've been lost through burnout. And it doesn't have to be like that. You know, if we have good process in our movements, and we design in good ways of looking after each other, and we recognize, you know, we have a culture where we can spot the risk of burnout, and we can say to people, I think you need to take a break. One of the things that we did in my transition group here in Totnes was we have a mentoring project where anybody who's working at the heart of transition, if they need support, can get professional counseling therapists and support, and it's made such a difference in terms of reducing burnout. Times when it becomes too overwhelming, knowing that you have that support available to you, you know, designing into groups a culture where people can say, you sent me an email at 4 o'clock in the morning, is everything okay? And you know, that we have a capacity and a level of trust between people to be able to say things like that. You know, this is not a time, you know, I remember early in Transition Town Totnes when we started, and we were very enthusiastic and many projects were happening. And we had a meeting where one person said, if we all carried on, if you were to carry on working at this pace, how long could you sustain this for? And everybody said, I don't know, 5 months, 6 months. And then we said, so, but how do you want this project to last? Oh, I don't know, 20 years. Well, then that's not going to work, is it? So having the honesty in groups to have those conversations, knowing that you can step back from things, and that they will need to change a little bit, recognizing, listening to your body for when it's time to step back. I think having an awareness of burnout and a capacity to support people to minimize it is fundamental to the success of the movements that we're all in, I think.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience, and great to hear what you're doing in your own groups. So the quality of the connection, the community where you're based off, I see as a very crucial role. And next week we'll have a conversation with Richard Bartlett about the micro-solidarity groups. And I think it's a very good approach to bring more quality and more deepness into communities and to create these safe spaces. And I think it's really important that we have places where we feel held. And yeah, so, and we have our first comment here. Thank you to support what we're speaking about, like the self-care is really important. And yeah, just think about if you have been in this situation, or if you know somebody who has been in this situation to go over them borders, and yeah, being honest to yourself. I think Rob said this before as well. So be honest to others in your group, but also being honest to yourself. So for myself, I had the situation that I had to take a break last year, and I'm very happy to be back now, but I'm still, sometimes I'm starting to run faster, and I realize, okay, slow down. We are not going for a sprint, we're going for a marathon. And I think especially this is so hard because we see the urgency of we really need the change now, but at the same time, it's a long play. So really, please, if you're watching, be careful with your energy, and yeah, it's a long play, and also reach out for other people, support them, and ask for support if you see you need it. And speaking about support, Rob, I would like to ask you, we spoke before, and that's my main topic with Co-Create. We spoke about the world community, we spoke about connecting the movements. What do you think will be necessary to make this next step, to weave those networks even closer?
Yeah, just one thing I was going to add. You were talking about burnout very beautifully there, and your own experience of it. I would just add that I think it's so important in the groups and in the movements that we create, that we don't replicate in them the same paradigm that is so responsible for the problems. You know, if we create hierarchical, patriarchal organizations that work everybody to death, trying to build a new world, then that doesn't really work, you know. So the culture in the groups that we're creating, it's really important that we pay attention to that. And in terms of how we work together better, I mean, I think there's been in the last 6 to 8 months since the rise of Black Lives Matter, there's also been an incredible, I've seen in many movements that I'm around and that I'm part of and that I observe, and in the work that I do as well, a much greater level of commitment to reaching out to different people and to have much more diversity in the conversations that we have and who we have them with, and I'm a great believer that one of the main things that fires the imagination is having the most interaction possible with people who aren't like us, and really experiencing a great diversity of people and their experience. And so I've loved seeing how new economy movements are working together with Black solidarity movements, who are working together with climate groups and LGBT groups, and this it's in that, I think, is something really, really important, that we learn to reach out to other people, and to there's that expression that's used a lot about doing the work. As organizations, we need to do the work around climate change, and around inclusion and diversity and privilege and systemic racism and so on, and that's going to be a fundamental part of this, because to go back to the theme of this session about living good lives, if we are able to live good lives in a society that at the same time makes it almost impossible for other people to live good lives because of their gender, their sexuality, their race, their religion, then we're not really living a good life. We're living a kind of a life in denial. And so to come back to your question, I love seeing these kind of unusual coalitions and coming together, which have particularly accelerated in the last 6 months, and something I've tried to be very conscious of with the podcast that I do, and when I'm scheduling events and looking for speakers, and it's really exciting. It's really exciting, intentionally setting out, saying for 2 months I'm only going to read books by women of color. I never did that before, and what an incredible world of stuff opens up to us. Or I'm only going to read books by, I don't know, writers from Africa or writers from India, or there's such a world of experience out there that we need to be really weaving together, I think.
Thank you for pointing this out again, because speaking about weaving together movements, of course, there are so many different backgrounds, and I call them social bubbles. We have to so I think 2 weeks ago I had a call with Fatima Rahim. She's a girl from Pakistan, SDG ambassador, and it really connects me back to the youth movement and getting to know what's going on in Pakistan and India. And you mentioned already the movement around Black Lives Matter. And I think there are even more social bubbles and sectors of society out there. And I really want to emphasize this, that we have to build bridges. It's really about going out there and connect to other social bubbles we are used to move in. And therefore, I'm also speaking about we as part of an alternative movement or society, stepping into and connect to more classical, maybe, because I see so many people who are in the field of civil society and alternative ways, and they really build borders regarding to science or business or government, and I really speak out for also connecting these sectors, because for change we need all. We need the classical society as well as the very progressive, and in this progressive different movements, different countries, different cultural approaches, because speaking about civil society is quite a European concept, and each in each country different as well. So bringing together those differences, I think it's very important to create this diverse and colorful future, which is able to hold the space for a good life for all. Because otherwise, it's always a good life for me and my cultural background. I think it's challenging us to think around the corner and outside our own box.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and maybe to come back to this question about creating a shared vision. So you were speaking about stories, about visioning, and speaking now about different backgrounds, social backgrounds. I think we have the experience that it can be quite hard to connect those. So what is your advice or your approach, how we can create a shared vision among all or within all, and bridging this to closing or connecting these different fields? What do you think? What would be a good approach, or what is your experience with that, creating shared visions?
Well, one of the big challenges that we have now is that we can't travel, and we are to learn how to use things like this and using Zoom and so on. Which, I gave up flying in 2006, and we built the transition movement without flying all over the world doing that. And so in Transition Network, our team is quite distributed in different places. So we've been using technologies like this for a long, long time. And I've loved seeing during the last year how much more skilled people have become at using. I've been to some amazing things people have done on Zoom. I've been to a really great festival on Zoom with some incredible music. I've been to some really amazing workshops where people have facilitated using Zoom in really brilliant, creative ways. I've also been to lots of terrible ones that have been really badly facilitated, and you just think you're crazy looking at a screen for so long. But so the question is, how do we build those bridges without being able to travel and meet in person? And there are some great things where that is happening. There's a thing called the Boundless Roots, a network a friend of mine is part of, which brings together really diverse people from around the world in a really well facilitated way to kind of go quite deeply into conversations around privilege and race and things like that. But I feel like it's one of the big things we need to do now, is to create those spaces where we can bring a real diversity of people together. And part of that is about, I always remember talking to somebody who was part of a group of Turkish women, Turkish mothers in London, I think it was. Okay. And there is this horrible expression which is called hard to reach groups, that they're called a hard to reach group. She said, we're not really that hard to reach because we meet here every Tuesday at 10 o'clock. So it's about invitation, I think. We need to really consciously invite people, and in a way that is open and curious. And it's with this conference, this summit that we're organizing, we're really trying to consciously invite as many different people as possible. It's not easy, but it feels like, particularly when you look at the US and now and the degree of polarization there, you really get a sense of, we need to start doing that work now.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, thank you for the conversation so far. So I'm just dreaming about this process of different groups are coming together, sharing, getting to know each other, building relationship across these borders we often experience. And yeah, I don't know how much time you had before to get some insight about what we are doing with Co-Create. So maybe just a few words about that, and to close with a small story or a little story. So we were speaking about this, creating this longing for change, right? And we want to empower more people to start changing things, getting together in projects. And Co-Create is focusing on the part of giving an infrastructure, so those who start and want to do something really find everything they need to do. So like we spoke about funding or places or events to do, partners or tools, how to collaborate and facilitate. And we from Co-Create, we believe that we have the solutions already out there. There are so many organizations are providing these resources, but our experience was that the way is quite long, and networks which exist right now doesn't focus enough on providing this infrastructure. So what we do and what our aim is to connect the global solution ecosystem, where really all the organizations around the world coming together as one world community to provide the resources we need to create this good life for all. And there comes in my mind the story of the stone soup. Do you know the story of stone soup?
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to tell it as a great storyteller? And what does it mean for you?
Me? Yeah, I mean, the way that I tell the story of the stone soup is somebody who, let me have a think, how does it start? Somebody, a traveler arrives in a very poor place and people are hungry, and he says, they say, oh, we have no food to offer you. You're very welcome to stay with us, but we have no food. And he says, well, that's okay, because I have bought my my magic soup stone. And they say, well, what's a magic soup stone? It's a stone that was given by a magic person, which you just bring me a big pot of water, and I will show you. So they bring the big pot of water, and they make a fire, and the water starts to boil. He says, well, I put my stone in, and then the stone will make soup. And they're like, oh, this is amazing. So he puts the stone in the water, which is just a pan of water, and as it boils, he tastes a bit. He goes, yeah, it's tasting really good. What it could really use is just a little bit of carrot. And then someone says, oh, I have some carrot, and they go back to their house and come back with some carrots. They put the soup in, they put them in the soup. Yeah, what this needs is some onions. Do we have any onions? And then someone goes and brings some onions, and it carries on like that. So everybody has a piece to make the soup, and everybody on their own thought, I can't make anything. But actually, when you create the right conditions and the right story, then actually everybody finds they have something to bring and something to contribute, and that actually what we can create together is so much bigger than if we all believe ourselves to be isolated individuals. That's how I remember it anyway.
Thank you. And might you share about what is your connection to this story? Do you have any experience, or what comes in your mind when you think about this story?
I mean, for me, it's a story that I like to use because because when you, it's partly about leadership in a way as well. I think, it's the idea that when you start doing something like transition, you are working in a community where people have lots of people don't feel like change is possible, and the story is that nothing can change, and there's often a kind of a scarcity kind of a mindset, But actually, if you're somebody who can come along and bring a good story that invites people to bring something into that story, then it's amazing. You find you create something extraordinary. Like in my town, I'm one of the people who started a brewery. I didn't have the money to start a brewery. I didn't have the skills for how to make beer, but I had a story, which was, why doesn't this town have a brewery? And what would it be like to have a brewery that played a really central role in the regeneration of this place and that celebrated this place and everything that was amazing about it? And that every beer told a story about the transformation of this place. And we started a brewery. Last year, we became the UK's first 100% community-owned brewery. We now have 270 owners who all invested into the business. And they invested into it because they love the story. And it's a great story. And they want to be part of that story. So you know, for me, this is really about, for me, that story of the soup stone is about, if you can tell the story right and in a way that people feel invited into the story, you create something, and people find resources they didn't know they had. They'd convinced themselves they didn't have any resource or any skills or expertise, but everybody can do something. Everybody can bring something, and you just need to find the right kind of way. And then actually you create something that could only happen with those people coming together. You know, imagination is really something we do together. It's something we can do on our own, but it's not the same on our own. When we come together with other people and do it, it's so much more powerful and extraordinary. And that's kind of why I love that story, I guess.
Thank you for sharing, Rob, and thank you for telling the story for me. So for the people who watch right now, is the last chance to reach out for us. You can use the comment function on Facebook if you have any questions or anything you would like to share. And to close this from the side of co-create, like I said, this stone soup story is really like the story of co-create. I think we are still very much in the process of finding the right story, but that's the basic idea. So co-create has been formed by the big belief that we as humanity, we already have all the solutions we need to rebuild our society. What we still have to learn is how we can coordinate our actions as changing society. So we were asking ourselves, what is the least, the smallest part we can add to what already exists out there? And we believe it's the moment, the place, the movement, and the process of change makers joining together in a strategic way. So we form this ecosystem so that when somebody wants to take action, we can start and find the right people and resources. This way, we really believe that in 2030, like Rob said, our work can be a totally different. Because I think we are able to create what we feel in our hearts. We just need a better way how to connect to each other. And this invitation is co-create. We invite you to join in this global co-creation challenge, because each one of us can contribute something to this soup. And yeah, so therefore I'm really, really, really grateful that you, Rob, joined in today to speak about the visioning part of A Good Life for All. As you saw, if you follow our videos down the road, we have the network talks on Thursdays where we go more into detail with other topics like network topics. And yeah, Rob, any last words from you before we closing our interview? A call to action or something you would like to share, or yeah.
I guess I would just say that the part of the brain, one of the things I learned writing the book was that the hippocampus, which is the part of your brain which is where your imagination fires from, and also where your memory fires from. Imagination and memory in many ways are the same thing. And that when we are being imaginative, it is like we are going to the cupboards and we are looking through all of our cupboards and we are saying, okay, what happens if I put that together with that? And it's the imagination is the bit when you put those two things together and you create something unique. And so our ability to imagine a better future, imagine a good life, to imagine a 2030 which is as good as it could possibly be because we did everything that we possibly could do. That ability depends fundamentally on our memory having as many stories of positive change in it as possible, so that when someone says, well, it's too late and we can't do anything, we can say, well, actually, in Berlin, they're doing this, and in Lyon, they're doing that, and in London, there's an amazing project where they're doing that. Did you know that in Denmark, so we need to find those stories. And if we just surround ourselves all the time with a very kind of conventional news media, which is very bad news, bad news, bad news, everyone's terrible, you can't trust anybody, nobody cares, everything is inevitably going to be a disaster, then we open our cupboards and there's nothing in the cupboards. So finding those stories, and those stories are out there, and it's what I try and do through the podcast that I do, From What If to What Next, is what I try and do. And everything that I do is trying to find those stories. And there are other organizations, Positive News Magazine, different places where you can find those stories. Really, it's one of the most precious, powerful and important things that you can do right now, is to find those stories and to fill your imagination cupboards with possibilities of change, particularly change that is initiated and led by people like you, because that gives us so much more hope, because then we move from hope being something passive, where we hope that something might happen and we hope that a miracle might change everything, to hope being something active and something that is, I hope to, in the next year, create a new food project. I hope to do this. I hope to do that. And so hope becomes something active. Somebody once described the transition movement as hope with its sleeves rolled up, which I really liked. And so I guess that would be my parting message, would be use this time that we have now to find as many of those stories and to read as much as you can, and find videos of people doing good things, because after COVID, we need to come out back in and rebuild the world in a different way. And we can only do that if we know that it's possible and we know those stories.
Thank you, Rob, for this wonderful call to action or advice. Find stories. I posted a comment below the video. 3 or 4 documentations I really loved. There is a transition movie 1 and 2 about the transition movement, some stories. There's in a movie called Voices of Transition, and probably you know Tomorrow as movie. I think those are very, very good examples for story collections, and there are many more out there. So yeah, follow this invitation, find stories, get motivated and inspired to see what people change around the world. You have an imagination what you can change for yourself. So thank you very much, Rob, for the interview. Thank you for taking time and inviting us to dream about the future we would like to live in. Thank you for watching. You can find the link to the event Rob mentioned also as a comment below. And in the links below, you also find the pages where you can find next events. On Saturday, we will have our community call, and next week there will be 2 more interviews. It was lovely that you joined in and watched. And yeah, so this is the invitation to join in the Global Cooperation Challenge. We all have to contribute. We can all contribute something to this wonderful world community. We're happy if you join in. Have a great day and make the best of it. Ciao, bye-bye.